Good morning to everyone in the United States, and hello to you wherever you are. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Dave Bowden, and I'm the news editor at Ballotpedia. We're here to talk about Chicago's runoff elections, which are happening a week from today, next Tuesday. To help me do that, joining me is Aimee Latour, a staff writer on our Marquee team, who's been covering Chicago's elections over the past few months. Actually, Aimee, I think you've been covering Chicago since right after Thanksgiving, which seems like quite a while ago. So thanks for being here.
Yep, thanks, Dave, and hi, everyone.
All right, can you give us a quick overview of what's on the ballot 1 week from today?
Sure. So voters will be electing their next mayor, 15 city council members, and a new city treasurer next week. In each of those races, no candidate got more than 50% of the vote in the general election on February 26th. And just a couple of fun facts to get us going. This is only the second runoff election for mayor in Chicago's history. The first one was in 2015. And runoffs first became possible in 1999 after the city switched to nonpartisan elections for mayor. And our current candidates, Lori Lightfoot and Toni Preckwinkle, advanced to the runoff from a field of 14 candidates in the general election. And that was the largest mayoral candidate field in the city's history.
So we've got a very exciting mayoral election this year, and it's going to make history in another way as well. Chicago is going to have its first female African-American mayor, regardless of who wins next week, right?
Yes. So Chicago has had two African-American mayors. Harold Washington was elected in 1983, and he died in office shortly after he was reelected in 1987. Then the city council appointed Eugene Sawyer, also African-American, to fill the seat until 1989. And there's only been one female mayor of Chicago, that was Jane Byrne. She served right before Harold Washington from 1979 to 83.
Very interesting. So let's dive into the race. Can you give us some background information on the two runoff candidates?
Sure. Let's start with Lori Lightfoot. She was the president of the Chicago Police Board from 2015 to 2018. And Mayor Rahm Emanuel appointed her to that position. The board decides disciplinary matters for police accused of misconduct. Lightfoot was also the chair of the city's Police Accountability Task Force. She was also a senior equity partner at the law firm Mayer Brown. And before that, she held a few different city government positions under former Mayor Richard M. Daley. And before that, she was a federal prosecutor.
So Lightfoot's background has a mix of being in city government and also being in the legal profession. How about the other runoff candidate, Toni Preckwinkle?
So Peckwinkle has been the Cook County Board of Commissioners president since 2010, when she was first elected to that position. She was an alderman for the 4th Ward for 19 years. She was also the Democratic committee woman for the 4th Ward. Preckwinkle worked in the City Department of Economic Development under Mayor Harold Washington. And before her political career, she taught high school history. More recently, in 2018, Preckwinkle became the chairwoman of the Cook County Democratic Party as well.
So Preckwinkle's actually been an elected local official since the 1990s.
That's right, yeah. And so the candidates' backgrounds have very much been a part of their messaging throughout the runoff election, both in terms of promoting themselves and criticizing each other.
Right, so Lightfoot has criticized Preckwinkle as being part of kind of like the political establishment in Chicago, and Preckwinkle has criticized Lightfoot's career in the legal profession.
Yes. So Lightfoot has been describing herself as the independent reform candidate in the race. She said that Preckwinkle's roles as chair of the Cook County Democratic Party and before that as a Democratic committee woman connect her to the history of the corrupt machine-style politics in the city. Lightfoot also says that Preckwinkle is connected to Alderman Ed Burke, who was charged with attempted extortion in January.
And how has Preckwinkle responded to these criticisms or attacks?
So Preckwinkle says that she has a progressive record as alderman and as the Cook County Board President. And she says she brings her progressive values with her wherever she goes, including the Cook County Democratic Party. She also says her background in city and county government make her the most experienced candidate, the most equipped to deal with the city's financial and other problems. And related to Ed Burke, she said that they weren't either friends or allies when they served together on the city council. And she's also said that she's mostly close with his wife, Ann Burke, who's a justice on the Illinois Supreme Court.
Got it. And we've all been around politics enough to know that if Lightfoot is saying some things to attack Preckwinkle, then I'm sure Preckwinkle is saying some other things to criticize Lightfoot. What has Preckwinkle said about her opponent's experience?
So Preckwinkle's framed Lightfoot as a wealthy corporate lawyer, and she's been critical of some of the cases that Lightfoot worked on. One example is she says that Lightfoot defended Merrill Lynch in a racial discrimination suit, and she's been critical of that. Peckwinkle has also said that Lightfoot is connected to the powerful political elite in the city because she accepted appointments from mayors Emanuel and Daley. And Peckwinkle has been contrasting that with her own history of serving elected as opposed to appointed office.
So they've both attempted to frame the other one as an insider. How has Lightfoot responded in terms of talking about her own experience?
Well, one thing is that Lightfoot has defended her legal career. She's said, for example, that she helped secure a comfortable settlement for the plaintiffs in the Merrill Lynch case. She says her experience at Mayor Brown generally enables her to manage teams and complex problems. She also says she's proud of the work she did in city government. And she says, that experience also enables her to manage both teams and budgets.
All right, that's a great rundown of the experiences and the kind of the resumes of these two candidates. What other types of differences are there between them? I understand they're both describing themselves as progressive.
Yep, that's right. And there is a lot of agreement between them on policy issues. They both want a fully elected school board. Both candidates support the police consent decree. They oppose a constitutional amendment to end 3% annual pension benefit increases for some of the city's pensioners. That's a reform that Mayor Emanuel has been pushing for. Both candidates also talk a lot about investing in neighborhood schools and small businesses, especially on the south and west sides of the city.
So there's been lots of overlap in what they've been talking about.
Yes, there have been, but there are areas of differences as well. One of the big issues they disagree on is city council ethics reform. So Lightfoot wants to end aldermanic privilege, and that refers to unwritten powers aldermen have over things like zoning, licensing, and permitting in their wards. So generally, if an alderman doesn't want a development project to go forward in his or her ward, it doesn't happen. And Lightfoot has said that this opens the door for corruption.
And I imagine this issue is really kind of taken center stage as a result of the charges against Alderman Burke, right?
It has. So Ed Burke runs a law firm, and his attempted extortion charge is based on the allegation that he tried to get a restaurant owner to use his law firm in exchange for giving the restaurant owner permits to do some remodeling. So Lightfoot says one of the ways to end that type of dealing is to get rid of aldermanic privilege. Peckwinkle does not agree with that. She says that based on her experience as an alderman, that aldermen are elected to represent their constituents' interests, and that aldermanic privilege is one way for them to do so.
Yes, aldermanic privilege, very interesting in Chicago, also because they have such a large city council. So therefore, aldermen really have not a huge territory that they're responsible for, so they can be very directly involved. That's very
Right.
interesting. What has Preckwinkle been talking about in terms of reforms to the city council?
So one thing that Preckwinkle supports is banning outside employment for city council members. This relates back to the Burke charge too, since he has a law practice. And Preckwinkle says she's never held another job alongside her elected offices and that aldermen shouldn't be able to. So Lightfoot, for her part, she supports limiting outside employment for aldermen, but not outright banning it. So she says council members should only be banned from forms of employment that present a conflict of interest with city business.
So it sounds like they're definitely coming at this issue from different sides. Lightfoot says end the aldermanic privilege, and Preckwinkle says ban outside employment for aldermen. Are there any other issues where the candidates stand apart?
Yeah, so another is school closings. Preckwinkle has said the city should not close schools either due to underperformance or under enrollment. And Lightfoot says closing schools should be a last resort, but she does consider it an option. But there's also quite a bit of overlap between the candidates on education policy. They both support a fully elected school board, as I mentioned earlier. That'd be a state law change, by the way, but the mayor of Chicago can play a role in advocating for that change. Both of the candidates also support a moratorium on new charter schools.
And obviously, almost every local race that we've seen recently, education is a primary focus, and that's obviously the case here. Are there any other differences that you want to highlight between the two candidates?
So there are a lot that are more differences of emphasis than flat out disagreements. One example of that is Preckwinkle often talks about her plan to implement a $15 minimum wage in Chicago by 2021. Now, Lightfoot says she supports the $15 minimum wage too, but she hasn't made it a key plank of her platform. Another example, they both agree on a lot of things related to city finances and the pension shortfall. For example, both support a progressive state income tax, legalizing marijuana, and a Chicago casino as ways to raise revenues. And they agree on some ways to reduce spending too. But Lori Lightfoot has been emphasizing her support for hiring a city risk manager as a way to cut spending. And that's not something I've encountered Preckwinkle talking about. So it's not necessarily a disagreement, but it's a difference between their proposals.
All right, Ame, that's a fantastic summary of all the background on the mayor's race, what they're talking about and what their histories are. Let's move over, change gears a little bit and talk about the city council runoffs. You said that there are 15 happening, right?
Yes, and of the 15 runoffs this year, 4 of those are open races. The other 11 have incumbents being challenged. In 2015, 7 of the 44 incumbents seeking re-election were defeated. This year, 45 incumbents ran for re-election, and so far, 3 incumbents lost outright in the general election. And we'll see about the rest next Tuesday.
Yeah, I think this is going to be something really fascinating to notice, is that we've got roughly the same number of incumbents who ran for re-election, and we had 7 incumbents who were defeated in 2015. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that number is higher or lower after next Tuesday, or if it's about the same. So that's a good summary. Are any of these aldermanic races particularly interesting to you?
Sure. I'll just mention a couple here. The 40th ward race is pretty interesting. Pat O'Connor has been representing that ward since 1983, and he's the second longest serving alderman on the council. He hasn't had many challenged elections in the past 25 years, but he had 4 opponents this year, and he ended up getting 33% of the vote in February.
Wow, that's probably something he hasn't had to deal with. Who's O'Connor up against in the runoff?
So his runoff challenger is Andre Vasquez, and he's a community organizer and a marketing account manager at AT&T. He's been endorsed by some progressive groups that includes the People for Bernie Sanders. And Vasquez is really emphasizing constituent services and being someone who will listen toward residents in his campaign. So O'Connor also considers himself a progressive, and he says that he helped raise the minimum wage and increased investments in public schools during his tenure.
So this is another interesting race that combines 2 candidates describing themselves as progressives, and then you have this theme of experience versus change. We've seen this repeated over and over again in elections across the country. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Any other open races that you've been closely following?
Yeah, so one of the open races is for the 47th. That's been an interesting one. Mayor Emanuel lives in the 47th ward, and that council runoff race has 2 high-profile candidates. This race is open because the current incumbent, Amaya Pawar, term limited himself to 2 terms. He's running for city treasurer.
Got it. So who is in that runoff?
The 2 candidates for the 47th are Matt Martin and Michael Negron. Martin works in the state attorney general's office as a civil rights lawyer, and he helped draft the police consent decree, which recently got approved by a federal judge. And that's a plan to reform the Chicago Police Department under federal oversight. Negron, he was a staffer for Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. He also worked in the Obama administration, and he was Mayor Emanuel's chief of policy for 5 years.
So what types of issues are these 2 candidates talking about in the runoff here in the 47th ward?
Well, one where they differ is affordable housing requirements for developers in the ward. They both want developers to be required to build more affordable housing units as part of their projects, but they disagree on how much more. Martin also proposes a city income tax, which Negron opposes.
Very interesting. So that's just a taste of the city council runoffs. There's 15 of them. We've just talked about a couple of them in depth. And in addition to the mayoral race and these city council runoffs, there's also another citywide runoff election for city treasurer. Is that right?
That is right. So 47th Ward Alderman Amaya Pawar, who I just mentioned, he's up against State Representative Melissa Conyers-Ervin in the treasurer runoff. Conyers-Ervin received 44% of the vote to Pawar's 42% in the general election in February.
So it was a close first round of voting between the 2. I'm going to ask a question I think a lot of people probably have, and I probably would be asking it too. What does the city treasurer do in Chicago?
Sure. So the city treasurer manages the city's investments, the 4 public employee pension funds, and the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund. To make it a little more concrete, I'll tell you some things that the candidates are proposing. Conyers-Ervin has been emphasizing that she wants to bring various financial analysis and auditing powers into the treasurer's office. And a couple of Pawar's proposals are a public bank and using the city's investments to launch a Green New Deal in Chicago.
All right, that's a great summary. This has all been some really interesting information ahead of next Tuesday's voting. Remember, we have the mayor, the city treasurer, and those 15 city council races. And obviously, has there been any thought about what the turnout will be? Have you heard anything from the Chicago Elections Board as to what mail-in turnout is seeming to be for the runoff? I know there was a lot of talk in the days leading up to the first round of voting.
I have not seen anything in that vein yet, no.
Okay, so it'll be interesting to see what the turnout is like and how this all gets resolved. But May, thanks for doing a great job on this. Ballotpedia will be covering things right up through the runoff election next Tuesday. And if you haven't subscribed already, we strongly encourage you to subscribe to the weekly email newsletter on these Chicago elections, which we've appropriately named the Deep Dish. And there's an edition this week and then a post-election edition next week, right, May?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, and links to do that are on our website. Also, please continue to visit ballotpedia.org for updates on all the news about politics, including another battleground election next Tuesday on April 2nd for a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We invite you to keep in the know with all of our email newsletters, including the Daily Brew, which comes out every weekday, and our weekly newsletter, The Tap. And our next upcoming webinar is just a few weeks away, which is on April 10th, where we'll catch you up on what has happened so far in the 2020 presidential race with the lead author of Ballotpedia's daily presidential news briefing, Emily Aubert. So thanks again, May, and thanks for watching, everyone.